Welcome back to Mr. Midnight, where scary stories come to life. Tonight, we're going into the dark mountains of Appalachia with 7 most disturbing true Appalachian Mountains horror stories. These stories come from real people like mail carriers, store workers, and school janitors who saw things in these old mountains that nobody can explain. Each story is a real nightmare from the hidden valleys of Virginia, the deep woods of West Virginia, and the forgotten towns of Kentucky, where scary things hide in the fog and old secrets still demand payment. These stories come from personal diaries, recorded talks, and first-hand accounts that were never supposed to leave these mountain towns. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe to Mr. Midnight for daily horror stories that will keep you awake at night. Ring that bell so you never miss when the mountain winds bring scary whispers from the valleys below. Now, let's go into the heart of Appalachia's most frightening mysteries, where normal life ends and your worst nightmares come true in mountains that are older than anything you can imagine. My name is Janet Morrison, and I've been a rural mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 12 years. I drive Route 47 through the Clinch Mountain region of Virginia, delivering mail to 87 addresses scattered across 80 miles of winding mountain roads. Most people think being a postal worker is boring, but out here in the mountains, you become part of people's lives. I know which cabin belongs to the Hendricks family with their 4 kids, where old Mrs. Patterson lives alone with her 12 cats, and exactly which mailbox needs a gentle kick to open properly. I've driven through blizzards that shut down the interstate, delivered medicine to folks who couldn't get to town, and even helped birth a baby when the ambulance couldn't make it up the mountain in time. My postal truck has 240,000 miles on it, and I can navigate these roads with my eyes closed. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. What happened last fall changed everything I thought I knew about my route, my job, and what's really living in these ancient hills. I'm telling this story because people need to know. The Postal Service won't talk about why they discontinued Route 47, and they sure won't tell you why no other driver will take the assignment. But I will. October started like any other month. The leaves were turning, creating a beautiful canopy of red and gold that made the drive almost peaceful. My route begins at the Clinch Mountain Post Office at 6:30 a.m., and I usually finish around 4 p.m. The truck is a standard LLV, long life vehicle, with a sliding door that sticks in cold weather and a radio that picks up maybe 3 stations on a good day. That Tuesday morning, October 3rd, was crisp and clear, perfect weather for driving. I had the usual load: bills, packages, a few Social Security checks for the elderly residents up the M1. Untamed. The first 30 miles of my route are paved county roads, but after that, it's all gravel and dirt paths that wind between cabins hidden in the trees. I was about 40 miles into my route, heading toward the Turner family's place, when I saw them for the first time. Along the roadside, arranged in a perfect spiral pattern, were animal bones. Deer bones, I figured. A femur, some ribs, and what looked like part of a skull. They were positioned with mathematical precision, creating a spiral about 3 feet across. I slowed the truck and stared. In 12 years of driving these mountains, I'd never seen anything like it. Sure, you find animal remains out here all the time. Hunters clean their kills, coyotes leave scraps, and nature takes its course. But this was different. These bones were arranged, deliberately, artistically even. I assumed some local hunter had a strange sense of humor, maybe trying to impress his buddies or scare city folks who occasionally wandered up here. I took a mental note of the location and continued my route. But the next day, there was another arrangement. This time, it was about a mile further up the road. Deer bones again, but arranged in a perfect triangle. 3 skulls at the points, femur bones creating the sides, smaller bones filling in the pattern. The precision was incredible. No adhesive, no support structure, just bones balanced perfectly against each other in a way that seemed impossible. By Friday of that first week, I'd counted 7 different bone arrangements along my route. Each one was more complex than the last. Spirals, triangles, even what looked like a mathematical formula spelled out in vertebrae and rib bones. The most impressive was a pyramid of skulls. Deer, rabbit, what might have been a fox, stacked 4 high without falling over. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Tom Bradley, when I got back to the post office. He just shrugged and said, "Mountain folks got their own ways of doing things, Janet. As long as it ain't blocking the road, it ain't our problem." But it was becoming my problem because the arrangements were getting stranger, more elaborate, and they were appearing overnight with no human footprints in the surrounding dirt. The second week of October, I started taking pictures with my phone. I wanted to show my ex-husband Mike what I was seeing. He's always been good at solving puzzles, and these bone arrangements were definitely puzzles. But when I looked at the photos later, they showed nothing but empty roadsides, just grass and trees where I clearly remembered seeing elaborate bone sculptures. I thought my phone camera was malfunctioning, so I tried different angles, different times of day. Same result. The bones were visible to my naked eye, but my camera captured nothing. I even tried the old Polaroid camera I keep in the truck for documenting damaged mailboxes. Same thing. Empty pictures. That's when I started asking the mountain residents about what I was seeing. Mrs. Patterson, who's lived in these hills for 73 years, just nodded when I described the bone arrangements. "Bone stacker's been busy," she said, rocking on her porch while her cats wound around her legs. "Ain't seen him work this much in years." "Him?" I asked. She looked at me like I was a child, asking about something obvious. "The bone stacker. Been in these mountains longer than any of us. Longer than the Cherokee who used to live here, probably. He arranges bones. That's what he does." I laughed it off as mountain folklore. Every region has its legends. Bigfoot, the Jersey Devil, the Mothman. I figured the bone stacker was just the Clinch Mountain version of local mythology. But then Mrs. Patterson said something that made my blood run cold. "He don't just arrange bones for fun, honey. He's counting, predicting. When you see his work, somebody's fixing to die." I drove home that evening with her words echoing in my mind. I tried to dismiss them as superstition, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with my route. The next morning, I found an arrangement outside the Hendricks family's mailbox. 4 deer skulls positioned in a perfect square with smaller bones creating intricate patterns between them. 4 skulls. 4 family members, Mom, Dad, and their 2 young kids. I knocked on their door, trying to figure out how to warn them without sounding crazy. Mrs. Hendricks answered, looking harried as always with 2 kids under 5 running around behind her. "Mrs. Hendricks," I said, "I noticed some unusual things near your mailbox. Animal bones arranged in patterns. Has anyone in your family been having any health problems? Any accidents?" She looked at me strangely. "We're all fine, Janet. Why? Is someone threatening us?" "How do you explain that you think supernatural forces are predicting her family's death through bone arrangements?" "Just be extra careful for the next few days, okay? Maybe keep the kids close to home." She promised she would, but I could see in her eyes that she thought I was losing my mind. 2 days later, I heard on the local news that the Hendricks' 4-year-old son had been killed in an ATV accident. It happened right at sunset, just as he was riding near their cabin. When I drove past their mailbox the next morning, the bone arrangement was gone. Completely. Not scattered by wind or animals. Just gone, as if it had never existed. By the end of October, I documented a pattern. The bone arrangements appeared near specific houses, always matching the number of people living there. 3 rabbit skulls outside the Miller house. They had 3 family members. A complex arrangement of 7 different animal skulls outside the old Morrison place, no relation to me. 7 people lived there across 3 generations. And within 24 to 48 hours of each arrangement appearing, someone from that household died. Usually accidents, sometimes sudden illness, but always deaths that seemed natural, if tragically timed. The local newspaper started calling it a statistical anomaly and unfortunate coincidence. The county sheriff's department investigated after the 4th death, but found no evidence of foul play. How could they? The bone arrangements didn't show up in photographs, and most people couldn't even see them. But I could see them, and they were getting more elaborate. On November 1st, I found an entire deer skeleton arranged in my headlights, standing upright in the middle of the road at 6:47 a.m. Not just bones placed in position, the skeleton was actually standing, as if held up by invisible strings. The bones moved slightly in the morning breeze, but held their formation perfectly. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, engine running, staring at this impossible sight. The deer skeleton was completely intact, every bone in its proper position, standing in a way that defied physics. As I watched, other bones began to roll out of the forest on either side of the road. Rabbit bones, possum bones, what looked like the remains of several different birds. They arranged themselves in circles around the standing deer skeleton, creating a complex mandala pattern that stretched across the entire width of the road. I had to deliver the mail. That's what we do. Rain, snow, sleet, or supernatural bone arrangements. I honked my horn, hoping to scare away whatever was causing this display. The bones didn't move. I revved my engine. Nothing. Finally, I put the truck in drive and moved forward slowly. As I got within 10 feet of the arrangement, all the bones simply collapsed into dust and blew away in a wind that touched nothing else around me. That evening, I found 7 rabbit skulls arranged outside my own mailbox. 7. My family had 7 members, if you counted my 2 teenagers, my mother, my brother's family who lived next door, and my nephew who was staying with us while he attended community college. On 7 people, the bone stacker had marked for death. I spent that night researching everything I could find about supernatural entities in the Appalachian Mountains. The Clinch Mountain region had a long history of unexplained deaths and disappearances. In the 1800s, local newspapers called it the Bone Devil, a creature that supposedly predicted and possibly caused mass deaths through bone arrangements. During the cholera outbreak of 1832, witnesses reported elaborate bone sculptures appearing throughout the valley, each one seeming to predict exactly how many people would die in specific areas. The entity was blamed for causing the deaths of 200 people, though modern historians assume the bone arrangements were just coincidental folk art created during a time of crisis. But the descriptions matched exactly what I was seeing. Bones arranged in impossible patterns, visible only to certain people, predicting deaths with mathematical precision. The old newspaper articles mentioned that the Bone Devil required balance. For every death it predicted, it gained power. But the balance could be disrupted through sacrifice, one person willingly giving their life to save others. Over the next 3 days, my family started having accidents. Small ones at first. My son David slipped and sprained his ankle. My daughter Emma came down with a fever that wouldn't break. My mother fell in her garden and bruised her ribs. My brother's wife cut her hand badly while cooking. Each incident was minor but dangerous, as if something was testing the waters. The bone arrangements around our mailbox changed daily, showing the progression. 7 skulls became 6, then 5, then 4. The entity was counting down. I knew what I had to do. On November 7th, I took a personal day and drove deep into the Clinch Mountain wilderness, following old logging roads until I found what I was looking for. The cave wasn't marked on any map, but the bone arrangements had been leading me toward it for weeks. Subtle directional patterns, arrows made from femur bones, spirals that pointed consistently toward the same spot in the mountains. The cave entrance was hidden behind a curtain of hanging roots and old bones. Thousands of bones, from animals and other sources, woven together like a macrame door curtain that clinked softly in the mountain breeze. Inside the cave, I found the bone stacker's lair. The cavern stretched back further than my flashlight could reach, and every surface was covered with bone arrangements, not random piles, intricate mathematical patterns that seemed to map out deaths across decades or possibly centuries. Skulls arranged in perfect spirals, femur bones creating geometric patterns, entire skeletons posed in dancing positions that suggested movement even in death. At the center of it all stood the bone stacker itself. The entity was tall, maybe 7 feet, and impossibly thin. Its body seemed to be made from bones woven together with sinew and dark magic, creating a humanoid form that moved with fluid grace despite being constructed from death. It wore a cloak made from hundreds of different bones, human and animal bones woven together into a garment that clicked and rattled with every movement. When it spoke, the voice came not from a mouth, but from the bones themselves, creating words through the rattling and clicking of calcium, striking calcium. 7 promised, it said, the sound echoing through the cavern. Balance must be maintained. Deaths feed the pattern feeds death. I stepped forward, my postal service flashlight feeling inadequate in the presence of something so ancient and powerful. I've come to make a deal, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Take me instead of the 7. 1 life for 7. That's better balance, isn't it? The bone stacker tilted its skull-like head, considering. Around us, the bone arrangements began to shift and rearrange themselves, creating new patterns I couldn't understand. 1 for 7, it repeated. Unusual. Most seek to prevent death, not embrace it. I'm not embracing it, I said. I'm choosing it. For them. The entity moved closer, and I could see that its cloak was not just decoration. The bones were part of its body, constantly shifting and rearranging themselves like living armor. Some of the bones looked fresh. Others were ancient, yellowed with age. Postal worker, it said, somehow knowing my profession. You understand duty, completion of routes, service regardless of conditions. I nodded. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Then you understand, the bone stacker said. This is my appointed round. I collect, I arrange, I predict, I balance. It gestured to the bone arrangements around us. Each pattern shows truth. Death comes to all. I simply organize the schedule. But you can change the schedule, I said. Take me now and spare the 7. The bone stacker was silent for a long moment. Then it raised one impossibly long arm, and the bone arrangements throughout the cave began moving, rearranging themselves into a single massive pattern that surrounded us both. Step into the circle, it said. Complete your final route. I walked into the center of the bone circle. The bones rose up around me like a spiral staircase, creating walls of calcium and death that reached toward the cave ceiling. The bone stacker began to move around the circle, and with each step, I felt something being drawn out of me. Not pain exactly, but a gradual emptying, like a battery slowly running down. My vision began to blur, but I could see my family in my mind. David and Emma, safe at home, my mother tending her garden, my brother's family laughing at their dinner table. 7 people who would continue their lives because I had chosen to end mine. The bone stacker completed the circle, and I collapsed in the center as my life force was absorbed into the ancient pattern of death and balance that had existed in these mountains for centuries. But as I died, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Purpose. The knowledge that my final route had been completed successfully. When the county sheriff found my postal truck abandoned on the mountain road 3 days later, there was no trace of what had happened to me. The official report listed me as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or wild animal attack. My family held a memorial service, but my body was never found. Route 47 was discontinued immediately. The Postal Service claimed it was due to budget cuts and the difficulty of finding replacement drivers for such a remote assignment. But the real reason was that no other mail carrier would take the job. Word gets around quickly in small postal districts, especially when it involves supernatural hazards. My family recovered from their mysterious illnesses and accidents within days of my disappearance. David's ankle healed faster than expected. Emma's fever broke immediately. My mother's bruised ribs stopped hurting. They never made the connection between my disappearance and their sudden return to health, which is probably for the best. The bone arrangements throughout the Clinch Mountain region stopped appearing entirely. Occasionally, hikers report finding single animal skulls or small collections of bones in the wilderness, but nothing approaching the elaborate patterns I witnessed during those terrifying weeks in October and November. Local residents believe the bone stacker retreated deeper into the mountains, satisfied with the bargain we struck. The entity got what it needed, a willing sacrifice that provided more spiritual energy then 7 unwilling deaths. In return, it agreed to limit its activities in the populated areas of the valley. As for me, I still patrol these mountains. Not as a postal worker, that route ended with my mortal life, but I found a new purpose. Lost hikers sometimes report being guided away from dangerous areas by a woman in a postal service uniform. Hunters claim they've been warned away from certain caves and hollow trees by someone who knows the mountains better than anyone living. I protect these families now in ways I never could when I was alive. The bone stacker keeps its bargain, and I keep mine. The mountains are safer because of our arrangement, even if the people living here will never know the price that was paid for their protection. Sometimes, late at night when the mountain wind is just right, you can still hear the clicking and rattling of bones deep in the wilderness. But it's quieter now, more subdued, the sound of an ancient entity that's learned to balance its hunger for death with respect for the living. And if you're ever hiking in the Clinch Mountain region and you see a woman in a postal service uniform, don't be afraid. Follow her guidance. She knows these roads better than anyone, and she's still delivering what matters most. The promise that some routes, once begun, are never truly abandoned. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night, nor even death, stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. My name is Patricia Wilkins, and I've been a licensed real estate agent for 18 years. I specialize in rural properties across Southwest Virginia, particularly in Wise County, where mountain retreats and hunting cabins are big business with city folks looking to escape Richmond and Virginia Beach. I've sold everything from 2-acre lots with creek access to 1,000-acre spreads that take half a day to tour properly. I've walked through houses where people died, properties with structural damage that would make most folks run, and land so remote you need GPS coordinates just to find the driveway. But what happened last October on a 50-acre property near the Kentucky border changed everything I thought I knew about this business. Some places aren't meant to be sold. The listing came to me through our office manager on a Tuesday morning in early fall. 50 acres with an 1800s farmhouse, asking price dropped to $180,000 after sitting on the market for 3 years. The property had been through 4 different agents and 7 potential buyers, but every deal fell through during the inspection period. The seller was getting desperate, and desperate sellers mean good commissions for agents willing to work the difficult properties. I loaded the lockbox codes into my phone and made the drive out Route 23 toward the property. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road that snaked through thick mountain forest for nearly 2 miles. No power lines visible, no cell towers, just dense woods pressing in from both sides. My GPS lost signal about halfway up the mountain, but I'd printed directions as backup, something you learn to do after 18 years of showing rural properties. The house itself was solid enough. 2 stories of hand-hewn logs with a metal roof that looked recently replaced. The foundation was good fieldstone, and the structure seemed level despite its age. Inside, the rooms were large with high ceilings and wide plank floors that would be beautiful once refinished. It needed work, new wiring, updated plumbing, modern insulation, but nothing that would scare away a buyer with renovation experience. I was taking photos for the virtual tour when I spotted something behind the house that wasn't mentioned in the listing description. Built into the hillside about 50 yards from the back porch was what looked like an old root cellar. The entrance was a heavy wooden door set into a stone-lined opening, typical of the storage cellars mountain families built to keep food fresh before refrigeration. What struck me as odd was the modern padlock securing the door, a heavy-duty master lock that looked brand new. I called the seller that afternoon to ask about the cellar. Jim Hartwell had inherited the property from his great-uncle and lived down in North Carolina. He'd never actually visited the place, just handled everything through lawyers and previous agents. "Root cellar?" he said when I asked. "Nobody mentioned any root cellar to me, and I don't know nothing about any lock. Far as I'm concerned, whatever's in there ain't part of the sale." I pressed him about getting the key for showings. Potential buyers would want to see all the structures on the property, especially something as practical as root cellar storage. "Miss Wilkins, I'm telling you straight, I don't have no key, and I don't want that cellar opened." Property's been in my family since the 1920s, and some things are better left alone. You can show the house and the land, but that cellar stays locked." His tone suggested the conversation was over. I'd dealt with sellers who had odd restrictions before, usually hiding structural problems or illegal additions. But this felt different. Jim Hartwell sounded genuinely spooked about something he claimed to know nothing about. The restriction bothered me for 2 days. Saturday morning, I decided to drive back up to the property with bolt cutters in my trunk. If there was something wrong with the cellar, flooding, structural damage, hazardous materials, I needed to know before bringing buyers out there. Better to deal with the seller's anger than have a deal fall through because of hidden problems. The mountain was quiet that morning, with early frost making the gravel crunch under my tires. I parked behind the house and walked over to the cellar entrance. The wooden door was thick oak, probably original to the 1800s, but the padlock was definitely new. It took less than a minute with the bolt cutters to snap the shackle. The door swung open with a long groan, revealing stone steps that descended into darkness. I pulled out my phone's flashlight and started down. The cellar was much larger than I'd expected, extending deep into the hillside with stone walls and an arched ceiling. The air was cool and dry, with no smell of dampness or decay. Along both walls were wooden shelves, floor to ceiling, lined with glass mason jars. Hundreds of them, all filled with what looked like preserved vegetables and meat in yellowish liquid. My first thought was relief, just old canning from whoever lived here years ago. Mountain families often stored decades' worth of preserved food in cellars like this. I moved closer with my phone light to get a better look. The preservation was remarkable. The contents looked fresh despite the dates scratched into the jar lids going back to the 1940s and 50s. But as I examined the jars more carefully, something felt wrong about the shapes floating in the liquid. The vegetables in one jar looked too red, too textured. I held my phone closer to the glass and nearly dropped it. It wasn't vegetables. It was a human heart, perfectly preserved, still the right color and size. The liquid around it was clear except for a slight yellow tint, and the heart looked like it had been removed yesterday. I stepped back and looked at the other jars with growing horror. Livers, kidneys, a pair of lungs, human organs, dozens of them, floating in preservation fluid that kept them looking fresh and healthy. In some jars near the back, I could see hands, feet, even what looked like human eyes staring out through the glass. My real estate training kicked in even through the shock. Document everything, I thought mechanically, and started taking photos with my phone. If this was some kind of crime scene, the police would need evidence. But as I moved deeper into the cellar, I realized the scope was much larger than a single crime. The back wall of the cellar had an opening, not another door, but a tunnel leading further into the mountain. I followed it with my phone light, my footsteps echoing off stone walls. The tunnel branched and connected to other chambers, each one lined with the same wooden shelves, each shelf holding more jars of preserved human organs. This wasn't one person's sick collection. This was a system, a network of underground storage that extended throughout the mountain. Some chambers had newer jars with recent dates. Others held collections that went back over a century based on the handwriting on the labels. In the deepest chamber, I found a leather journal sitting on a small wooden table. The pages were yellowed but well preserved in the dry air. The entries were written by different hands across decades, documenting specimens collected with clinical precision. Dates, physical descriptions, which organs were harvested, and notes about the preservation process. The earliest entries were from 1897, written in careful script. Young male, approximately 20 years, traveling alone through Mountain Pass. Excellent heart specimen, liver shows no disease. Process successful, specimens remain viable. Later entries showed the same pattern continuing through the decades. Family of 4 from Richmond, Vehic. Latrouble near property. Children provided especially fine examples. All specimens responding well to treatment. The preservation method was described in several entries, but the process made no scientific sense. Some kind of solution involving local spring water, mountain herbs, and what the writers called the old knowledge passed down through their family. According to the journal, the organs weren't just preserved, they were kept alive somehow. Hearts that still beat, kidneys that still filtered, eyes that still tracked movement. As I read, I became aware of a sound echoing through the tunnels. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from deeper in the mountain. I clicked off my phone light and listened. The steps were uneven, like someone dragging a damaged leg, but getting closer. I should have run then. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of those tunnels and never come back. But I was a real estate agent with 18 years of experience dealing with difficult properties. I thought about liability issues, disclosure requirements, the legal implications of what I'd found. My professional mind was still trying to process this as a property problem to be solved. The footsteps stopped. In the silence, I heard breathing, raspy, labored, like someone with damaged lungs struggling for air. Then a voice, ancient and dry as the air in the tunnels. "You shouldn't have opened the door." I turned my phone light back on and pointed it toward the voice. What I saw made me drop the journal. Standing in the tunnel entrance was something that had once been human but looked mummified, preserved like the organs in the jars. Skin stretched tight over bones, clothes that might have been from the Civil War era, eyes that were cloudy white but somehow still focused on me. "The collection must be maintained," it said in that dry whisper voice. "Family tradition, 5 generations of preserving the finest examples. Your organs will make excellent additions." It started moving toward me, that dragging walk, and I saw it was carrying something. Old surgical tools, tarnished but sharp. Behind it, I could hear more movement in the tunnels, more footsteps, more voices whispering about specimens and preservation. I ran. My phone light bounced wildly as I sprinted through the tunnel system, trying to remember which way led back to the main cellar. The voices followed, echoing off the stone walls, discussing which organs they wanted to harvest first. They mentioned my eyes specifically. Excellent color, very healthy, perfect for the collection. I burst out of the tunnel into the main cellar and scrambled up the stone steps. Behind me, I could hear them coming, their dragging footsteps on the stairs. I slammed the wooden door and ran for my car, not stopping until I was back on Route 23 with cell service. I called 911 from the gas station in town. 2 sheriff's deputies followed me back to the property that afternoon, but when we got to the cellar, the door was sealed with fresh concrete. Not just closed, completely filled in, like no entrance had ever existed. The deputies looked at me like I was having some kind of breakdown. "Ma'am, there's no cellar here," the older deputy said, examining the hillside. "Just natural stone formation. Maybe you got confused by shadows or something." Jim Hartwell claimed I'd suffered from mountain fever, some kind of altitude sickness that caused hallucinations. He suggested I get medical attention and maybe consider a different line of work if rural properties were too stressful. But I knew what I'd seen. I spent the next month researching missing persons cases in Wise County going back 150 years. The pattern was clear. Hikers, travelers, even entire families disappearing near properties with old root cellars. The disappearances clustered around specific areas of the county, always near mountain properties with 1800s-era buildings. I mapped the locations and realized they formed a pattern appeared. Across the mountains, a network of connected underground systems where that family had been harvesting people for over a century. The preservation process kept them alive somehow, still maintaining their collection, still adding new specimens whenever opportunity presented itself. I burned my listing files for that property and 17 others in similar locations. I transferred my license to the Richmond office and now only show suburban developments and city condos. I won't even drive through Wise County anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I get calls on my business line. The caller ID shows phone numbers from those mountain properties, numbers that shouldn't be connected to working lines. Ancient voices asking about real estate, wanting to know if I have any clients looking for remote mountain properties where they could meet privately to discuss business. I hang up immediately, but they keep calling. They know I found their collection, and they know I understand what they are. They're patient. They've had over a century of practice. They'll wait for the right opportunity, the right isolated property showing, the right moment when I'm alone on a mountain road with no cell service. The collection must be maintained. That's what the voice in the tunnel told me, and I'm starting to think they consider me part of it now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been working as an insurance adjuster for 8 years. I handle property damage claims, house fires, storm damage, car accidents. You name it, I've seen it. I've walked through burned-out homes where families lost everything, and I've seen what people do when they're desperate for money. I thought I'd seen every kind of human behavior there was. But what happened in October 2023 in a tiny mountain town called Sourwood Gap, Virginia, showed me there are things far worse than insurance fraud. There are things that make you question if some places should just be left alone. My husband Mike had been putting off visiting his Uncle Earl for almost 10 years. Earl was the only family Mike had left, and he lived in this remote mountain community called Sourwood Gap. Population 40 people. Mike kept making excuses. Work was too busy, the drive was too long. We'd go next month. But when Earl called in early October saying he wasn't feeling well, Mike finally booked the time off. I work from home mostly, so I can handle claims anywhere I have cell service. Mike manages a construction crew, so getting time off is harder for him. We both needed a break anyway. The insurance business had been brutal that year. 3 major storms hit our region, and I was working 12-hour days processing claims. The drive to Sourwood Gap took us deep into the Virginia mountains, down winding roads that got narrower and narrower. Cell service cut out about 20 miles before we reached the town. My laptop couldn't connect to anything. I remember feeling annoyed because I had 3 claims reports due that week. "Don't worry," Mike said. "Uncle Earl has a landline. You can call the office if you need to." We arrived on a Friday afternoon, right in the middle of something called the Harvest Blessing Festival. The whole town was decorated with corn stalks, pumpkins, and handmade scarecrows. There was traditional bluegrass music playing, and I could smell apple butter cooking somewhere. It seemed charming, like something from a postcard. Uncle Earl was in his 70s, thin and weathered, but his eyes were sharp. He hugged Mike like he was still a little kid and welcomed me with a warm smile. His house was small but clean, filled with old furniture and family photos. "You picked the perfect time to visit," Earl said. "The Harvest Blessing only happens once a year. The whole community comes together for 3 days. You'll love it." That first evening, the townspeople were incredibly friendly, almost too friendly. They kept asking me personal questions, how long Mike and I had been married, whether we had kids, whether we were planning to have kids. "Sarah's got good childbearing years ahead of her," one elderly woman said, looking me up and down like I was livestock. She actually reached over and felt my hips. "Strong bones, good breeding stock." I laughed it off, figuring it was just mountain folk being curious about outsiders. Mike seemed amused too. These people lived isolated lives. Of course they'd be interested in visitors, but it kept happening. Women would examine my hands, comment on my wide hips and healthy complexion. Men would nod approvingly and make comments about fresh blood and strong genes. I started feeling uncomfortable, but Mike just shrugged it off. "They're harmless, Sarah. Just old-fashioned people." The festival got more elaborate each day. The music became more complex, with drums and strange stringed instruments I'd never seen before. The dancing went on for hours, with people spinning and chanting in rhythms that seemed almost hypnotic. On Saturday night, they brought out masks, carved wooden faces representing harvest spirits and fertility goddesses. The masks were beautiful, but unsettled, with exaggerated feminine features and corn silk hair. When people put them on, they moved differently, like the masks were controlling them. I started feeling dizzy during the dancing. Even though I'd only been drinking water, my vision would blur at the edges, and sometimes I'd lose track of time. I'd be watching the dancers, and suddenly an hour had passed without me realizing it. Mike was changing too. He became more protective, more aggressive. When a younger man from town tried to talk to me, Mike stepped between us with this look in his eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't jealousy. It was something more primitive, like he was guarding territory. On Sunday evening, the final night of the festival, Earl told us we'd been chosen as honored guests for the blessing ceremony. It was supposedly a great honor. Outsiders were rarely invited to participate. It's just a traditional harvest blessing, Earl explained. The community gives thanks for the year's crops and asks for fertility in the coming season. You and Mike represent new life, new hope for our town. I should have said no. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was wrong. But Mike was so excited to be included in his uncle's community traditions, and I didn't want to seem rude. The ceremony was held in a forest clearing about a mile from town. Torches and candles lit the space, and the trees were decorated with corn dolls and animal bones tied with red ribbons. The whole community formed circles around Mike and me, about 40 people total. They started chanting in what sounded like an old mountain dialect. Words I couldn't understand, but that seemed to go straight to my bones. The drumming was hypnotic, and I felt that same dizziness from before, but stronger. Then the elderly women stepped forward. They told me I needed to be examined for fertility signs as part of the blessing. Before I could protest, they were removing my clothes, feeling my body, checking my breasts and hips like I was an animal being prepared for breeding. I looked at Mike for help, but he was just standing there, swaying to the drumming, watching with glassy eyes like he was in a trance. When I tried to cover myself, he actually held my arms down. "It's part of the ceremony, Sarah," he said, but his voice sounded different, hollow. "Don't fight it." The women painted symbols on my skin with what looked like blood mixed with herbs. The liquid burned where it touched me, but I couldn't move, couldn't resist. The chanting got louder and faster, and the drums beat like a massive heartbeat. The last thing I remember was falling to my knees as the whole world spun around me. The masked dancers were moving faster and faster, and the chanting reached a crescendo that seemed to split the night air. Then everything went black. I woke up the next morning in Earl's guest bedroom with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Mike was asleep beside me, and we both had strange symbols painted on our bodies. Not the temporary paint from the ceremony, but permanent marks that looked like they'd been burned into our skin. I ran to the bathroom and tried scrubbing the symbols off with soap, then with Earl's harsh lye soap, then with a scrub brush until my skin was raw and bleeding. The marks wouldn't budge. They were part of me now. Mike's symbols were similar but different, more angular, more aggressive looking. When I woke him up and showed him, he just shrugged. "Probably just henna or something," he said. "It'll fade." But I knew it wouldn't fade. I could feel the marks burning under my skin, like they were alive. When we tried to leave after breakfast, we found the road blocked. Several men from town had parked their trucks across the only way out, claiming there was a gas leak that needed to be fixed before anyone could pass. "Just one more day," Earl said. "The blessing isn't complete yet. You need to stay for the final part." That's when he told us the truth. Sourwood Gap was dying. The young people had all moved away, and no babies had been born in the community for over 15 years. The population was down to just 40 people, all over 50. "We need new blood," Earl said. "Young, fertile blood to carry on our traditions. The harvest ritual was designed to ensure that." I felt sick to my stomach, not from fear, but from something else. A strange nausea that felt familiar but impossible. I made Mike drive me to the nearest pharmacy, which was in a town about 30 miles away once we convinced the men to move their trucks. I bought a pregnancy test with shaking hands. It came back positive. I was on birth control. I'd been taking it religiously for 5 years. But somehow, impossibly, I was pregnant. Mike was thrilled, which scared me even more. His personality had completely changed since the ceremony. He became violently protective, snarling at anyone who even looked at me wrong. When a cashier at the pharmacy asked if I was feeling all right, Mike grabbed the man by the shirt and slammed him against the wall. We couldn't leave Sourwood Gap. Every time we tried, something happened. Our car would break down, the roads would be blocked, or Mike would refuse to go. The townspeople had prepared a birthing chamber in the community center, decorated with the same symbols that were now burned into my skin. They kept talking about the child who will renew us and the harvest spirit made flesh. I realized the baby wasn't just mine. It belonged to the whole community somehow. The pregnancy was developing at an impossible rate. Within a week, I looked 3 months along. Within 2 weeks, I was showing like I was 6 months pregnant. The baby moved constantly, responding to the community's chanting and singing like it could hear them through my body. I started having dreams where I could feel 2 distinct presences inside me. One human, one something else entirely. The something else was older, hungrier, and it was growing faster than the human baby. During an ultrasound at the town's tiny medical clinic, the old doctor Semmau my lid and showed me the screen. There were 2 shapes moving inside me. One looked like a normal baby, but the other was wrong somehow, too angular and moving in ways that defied human anatomy. Twins, the doctor said. One for you, one for us. That night, I waited until Mike was asleep and ran. I made it almost to the highway before I heard the dogs and saw the torches behind me. The entire town was chasing me through the forest like I was a runaway slave. Mike was leading the chase, but he wasn't my husband anymore. He looked at me like I was livestock that had broken out of its pen. When he caught me, there was no recognition in his eyes, no love, just the need to protect his investment. A state trooper found me on Highway 58, flagging down cars in my nightgown at 3 a.m. I was bleeding from scratches and crying hysterically about harvest spirits and mountain cults. He probably thought I was having a mental breakdown, but he took me to the hospital anyway. The emergency room doctors confirmed what I already knew. I was carrying twins, but something was very wrong. One baby looked normal on the ultrasound, but the other kept disappearing from the screen, like it existed in a space the machines couldn't see. They did an emergency C-section that night. They saved the human baby, a healthy girl who cried like any normal newborn. But when they reached for the second child, there was nothing there. Just a dark, oily substance that dissolved as soon as it hit the air. Mike died during my recovery. The doctors said his body just shut down. Heart failure, brain hemorrhaging, organ failure. It was like something had been keeping him alive artificially, and when it left, his body couldn't function on its own. I moved across the country with my daughter Emma as soon as I was well enough to travel. I changed our names, paid cash for everything, and never looked back. The state police investigated Sourwood Gap 3 months later after relatives reported several residents missing. They found all 40 townspeople dead in their homes, apparently dying simultaneously during what investigators called some kind of ritual gone wrong. The official report blamed carbon monoxide poisoning from faulty heating systems. I know better. The harvest ritual failed when I escaped with the human baby. Whatever supernatural force was sustaining the community died with it. Emma is 7 years old now, completely normal and healthy. But sometimes she draws pictures of mountain festivals with people in wooden masks. She talks about her mountain family that she's never met, and she knows songs in that strange dialect I heard during the ceremony. I watch her carefully, especially during harvest season. The symbols on my skin have faded but never disappeared completely. On certain nights when the moon is right and the air smells like wood smoke and apples, they burn like fresh wounds. I've learned to live with the knowledge that some places in this world operate by rules we don't understand. Some communities will do anything to survive, even if it means sacrificing strangers to something ancient and hungry. I still work as an insurance adjuster, but I turn down any claims from rural mountain communities. Some losses are too dangerous to investigate, and every October when the leaves start turning and the air gets crisp, I make sure Emma and I are somewhere far away from any harvest festivals. Because I know that somewhere out there, in communities just like Sourwood Gap, the old traditions are still alive and waiting for the next outsiders foolish enough to accept their hospitality. The harvest never really ends. It just waits for new seeds to plant. My name is David Chen, and I've been working as a night custodian for 12 years now. started right after my divorce when I needed steady work that wouldn't interfere with seeing my daughter on weekends. Night shift custodial work isn't glamorous, but it pays decent and gives you plenty of quiet time to think. I've cleaned office buildings, hospitals, even a courthouse once. But what happened during my 6 months at Mountain View Elementary in Beckley, West Virginia, changed everything I thought I knew about being alone in empty buildings. Some places aren't as empty as they seem. I took the job at Mountain View because the pay was better than my previous gig, and elementary schools are usually pretty straightforward to maintain. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Monday through Friday. Just me, my cleaning cart, and a building full of tiny desks and colorful bulletin boards. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, seemed nice enough during my interview. She handed me the keys and said the building was all mine after dark. The school itself was typical for West Virginia. Single story, built in the 70s, with that institutional beige paint and fluorescent lighting that makes everything look slightly sickly. 24 classrooms, a cafeteria, library, and main office. 2 long hallways forming an L shape with the gym and multi-purpose room at the far end. My routine was simple: empty trash, mop floors, clean bathrooms, vacuum carpeted areas. The whole building took me about 6 hours if I didn't rush. For the first 3 months, everything was normal. I'd arrive at 10, flip on the lights section by section, and work my way through the building systematically. The only sounds were my footsteps, the hum of the cleaning equipment, and the occasional settling noise from the old building. I actually enjoyed the peace. No drama, no office politics, no one looking over my shoulder. Just honest work in blessed silence. I started hearing the voices in January. At first, I thought they were coming from outside. The school sat in a residential area, and some families keep odd schedules. Kids staying up late, playing in their yards even in winter. The voices sounded like normal children's chatter, laughing, talking, the kind of playground conversation you'd expect. Nothing unusual about that. But then I realized the voices were coming from inside the building. It started around midnight, always from the same general area, the kindergarten wing on the west side. I'd be mopping the main hallway, and I'd hear children talking and giggling from one of those rooms. Clear as day, like there was a whole classroom full of kids in there having a party. The first few times it happened, I'd walk over to investigate. Made sense to check it out. Maybe someone left a TV on, or there was some kind of security issue. But every time I opened the door and flipped on the lights, the room was empty. Tiny chairs stacked on tiny tables, everything exactly as it should be. And the voices would stop the moment I entered. Then they'd start again as soon as I left. I tried to ignore it at first. Old buildings make weird noises, sound carries in funny ways. Maybe it was the heating system or noise from the apartments across the street somehow echoing through the vents. I had logical explanations for everything, but the voices were getting clearer. By the end of January, I could make out individual words. Children asking questions, telling stories, sometimes singing little songs. It sounded exactly like a classroom during free time when kids are just chatting with each other. The weird part was how normal it sounded, not scary or threatening. Just kids being kids. That's when I decided to record it. I pulled out my phone one night when the voices were particularly clear. Stood right outside Mrs. Patterson's kindergarten room, where the sound was loudest, and hit record. I could hear them plain as anything, at least 6 or 7 different children's voices, maybe more. When I played it back, there was nothing. Complete silence. I tried again the next night, same result. The voices were right there. I could hear every word, but my phone picked up nothing. I even borrowed an old tape recorder from the school's AV closet. Same thing. Silence on playback, but clear voices in person. That's when I started getting nervous. I mentioned it to Mrs. Rodriguez when she came in early one morning. Tried to keep it casual, said I'd been hearing some strange noises from the kindergarten wing, maybe a radio left on or something. She gave me this look like I was losing it and suggested I might be working too hard, maybe consider seeing someone about stress. But the voices kept getting more specific. By February, they weren't just random chatter anymore. They were calling my name. "Mr. David," they'd say in those sweet little kid voices. "Mr. David, come play with us. We're lonely here at night." That's when I should have quit. But I needed the job. And honestly, the voices weren't threatening. Just sad. Like children who wanted attention. So I started talking back. I know how that sounds, but you have to understand. After working alone for months, having something to talk to felt almost normal. Even if it was just empty air. I can't play right now, I'd say to the empty hallway. I have to finish cleaning. And they'd answer, "That's okay, Mr. David. We can wait. We've been waiting a long time." The conversations got longer. The children would tell me about their day, ask about my daughter, even comment on things happening at the school. They knew which teachers were getting married, which students had been to the principal's office, details about field trips and class parties. I started verifying their information just out of curiosity. Everything they told me was accurate. Perfectly accurate. That should have been my second red flag. By March, the voices were making requests. "Mr. David, can you bring us some cookies? We're so hungry." "Mr. David, we need new crayons. The ones we have are all broken." I started leaving little things in the classrooms. A pack of cookies on Mrs. Patterson's desk, some crayons in the art supplies closet. Just small stuff, nothing anyone would miss. By morning, the items were always gone. I checked the security cameras one night, thinking maybe someone else was coming in after hours. The footage showed me clearly, placing the cookies on the desk, leaving the crayons in the supply closet. But there was no one else in the building, no one taking the items. They just disappeared. The voices were grateful, though. "Thank you, Mr. David. You're so kind to us. We wish more grown-ups were like you." But their requests started getting bigger. "Mr. David, we're so lonely. Can you bring us some friends? Other children to play with?" That's when I understood what they really wanted. They wanted me to bring real children to the school. Living children. I refused, of course. Told them absolutely not. That was dangerous and wrong. The voices got quiet for a few nights after that, and I thought maybe I'd gotten through to them. Then the building started fighting back. The lights began flickering whenever the voices appeared, especially in the kindergarten wing. The electrical system would go haywire, outlets sparking, circuit breakers tripping for no reason. The fire alarm went off 3 times in 1 week, sending the fire department to an empty building with no signs of smoke or malfunction. The voices multiplied too. What started as 6 or 7 children became dozens. The sound would follow me through the entire building now, echoing from every classroom, every hallway. Children's laughter bouncing off the walls, their voices overlapping until it sounded like the school was full of ghosts, IT kids having recess. I tried to research the building's history, thinking maybe there was some tragedy I didn't know about. What I found in the county records made my blood run cold. Mountain View Elementary was built in 1979, but it sat on the foundation of something much older. The Beckley Children's Home had operated on that exact spot from 1918 to 1923, an orphanage that housed kids whose families couldn't care for them. On December 23, 1923, during the annual Christmas party, a fire started in the basement. The building had no proper fire exits, no emergency lighting, and the single staircase was blocked by flames within minutes. 43 children, ranging in age from 5 to 12, died in that basement. Their bodies were never recovered. The basement collapsed during the fire, burying everything under tons of rubble and earth. When they built the elementary school 56 years later, they poured the new foundation right over the old one. Those children were still down there, still trapped, still waiting for someone to acknowledge them. The voices weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were just lonely, desperate for attention after nearly a century of being ignored. But their desperation was making them dangerous. I researched what happened to the previous custodians. 3 different men had held this job in the past 5 years. One quit after 2 months, claiming the building was wrong. Another lasted 6 months before suffering what the hospital called a massive heart attack at age 34 with no prior health problems. The third was found dead in the boiler room, apparently from cardiac arrest, though the autopsy found no underlying heart condition. The echo maker wasn't just calling to those children. It was feeding on fear, growing stronger every time someone responded to its voices. And I'd been feeding it for months. I tried ignoring the voices completely, but By then it was too late. The entity had grown too powerful. The phantom children began appearing visually, translucent figures in the hallways, small hands press, Ed against classroom windows, burned faces looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. They looked exactly like you'd expect children who died in a fire to look. But here's the thing that broke my heart. They weren't evil. They were just scared kids who'd been trapped in darkness for almost 100 years, calling out for help that never came. The entity that fed on their presence was something else entirely, something that used their voices to lure the living. I couldn't abandon them. Not those kids. I contacted Father Martinez at St. Joseph's Catholic Church downtown, explained the situation as best I could without sounding completely insane. To his credit, he didn't hang up on me. He said he'd help. We met at the school on a Friday night in March. Father Martinez brought holy water, a Bible, and a small wooden cross that belonged to his grandmother. I brought my cleaning supplies and my keys. The voices started the moment we entered the building. "Mr. David, who is that man? We don't like him. Make him go away." But as we walked toward the kindergarten wing, other voices joined in. Older voices, sadder voices. "Please help us," they whispered. "We've been so cold for so long." Father Martinez led us down to the basement, to the old boiler room where the foundation of the original orphanage was still visible through cracks in the newer concrete. He performed a blessing there, speaking words of peace and forgiveness, acknowledging the children who died and offering them rest. The temperature in that basement dropped 20 degrees in the span of a minute. Our breath came out in white puffs, and frost formed on the walls. But the voices, all those children's voices, began saying thank you over and over again. Then, slowly, they faded away. The building felt different immediately. Lighter somehow, warmer. The oppressive atmosphere that had been building for me once just lifted. I finished my shift that night in complete silence. Real silence, not the tense quiet that comes from ignoring voices you know are there. For the first time in months, I was truly alone in that building. I worked at Mountain View for 3 more months after that, and never heard another voice. The electrical problems stopped. The fire alarms behaved normally. The building felt like what it was supposed to be, just an empty school at night. I installed a small memorial plaque in the main hallway before I left that job. It reads, "In memory of the children of Beckley Children's Home, 1918 to 1923, they are not forgotten." Mrs. Rodriguez asked about it once, and I told her it was just something I thought the school needed. She didn't press the issue. I'm working at a different school now, across town. The pay is about the same, and it's just as quiet. But sometimes, when I'm mopping those empty hallways late at night, I think about those 43 children who spent a century calling out in the dark. At least they're at peace now, and honestly, so am I. My depression lifted completely after that night in the basement, like helping those kids find their way home helped me find mine too. If you work nights in old buildings, especially places where children used to be, pay attention to the voices you hear. Not all of them are echoes from your imagination. Sometimes the dead just need someone to listen. But be careful who you answer to. Some things that call out in the dark aren't looking for help. They're looking for company. My name is Robert Mitchell, and I've been a cable TV technician for 12 years. I work for Blue Ridge Communications, installing cable and internet for folks living in the mountains of southwestern Virginia. Most of my customers live way out in the country, miles from their nearest neighbor. I drive a company van loaded with boxes, cables, and all kinds of equipment up dirt roads and logging trails that GPS can't even find. I've climbed towers in thunderstorms, crawled under houses full of spiders, and fixed lines that bears had chewed through. But what happened last October near Mount Rogers changed everything I thought I knew about radio signals. Some frequencies aren't meant for human voices. I live alone in a double-wide mobile home about 15 miles south of Mount Rogers, right on the edge of Jefferson National Forest. After my divorce 2 years ago, I moved out here for the quiet and the cheap rent. The isolation doesn't bother me much because I have my hobby, amateur radio. I'm licensed as KC4RMT, and I've got a pretty nice setup. There's a 40-foot antenna tower behind my trailer with a tri-band beam antenna that can reach operators all over the world. Inside, I've got a Yaesu FT991A transceiver, an amplifier, and a computer for digital modes. Most evenings after work, I'll get on the air and talk to other ham operators in Japan, Australia, Europe, anywhere the signals will reach. The hobby started as a way to feel less alone after Sarah left. There's something comforting about hearing friendly voices from thousands of miles away, knowing there are people out there who share your interests. We talk about equipment, weather, families, normal stuff. The radio community is like a big family, and we look out for each other. My mobile home sits in a perfect spot for radio reception. There's no power lines nearby to create interference, no cell towers, no city lights, just forest and mountains in every direction. During the day, I'm out installing cable for customers scattered across 3 counties, but at night, I'm connected to the world through radio waves. On October 15th, I'd just finished a difficult installation job for an elderly couple who lived 20 miles up a mountain road. Their old satellite dish had been knocked down by a storm, and they hadn't had TV or internet for 3 weeks. It took me most of the day to run new cable and get everything working. By the time I got home, it was past 9 p.m. I was tired, hungry, and looking forward to checking into the evening net on 40 meters. I heated up a frozen dinner and powered up the radio. Band conditions were good that night. I talked to a guy in Texas, then checked into the Virginia emergency net on 3.965 megahertz. Everything seemed normal. Around midnight, I switched to 20 meters to see if I could work any DX stations in Asia. That's when I first heard it. At exactly 2:17 a.m., my radio picked up a signal on 121.5 megahertz, the emergency frequency. This frequency is reserved for aircraft emergencies and emergency beacons. You're not supposed to transmit on it unless you're in real trouble. But what I was hearing wasn't a mayday call or an emergency locator beacon. The signal was strong, stronger than anything I'd ever heard on that frequency. It consisted of what sounded like digital data mixed with static. Long strings of numbers, then bursts of noise that reminded me of a dial-up modem connecting to the internet. But there was a pattern to it, a rhythm that seemed almost musical. I grabbed my handheld scanner and tuned it to 121.5. The signal was coming through crystal clear. I checked my watch, 2:17 a.m. exactly. The transmission lasted for exactly 47 minutes, ending abruptly at 3:04 a.m. Then nothing but the usual static. As a cable technician, I work with digital signals every day. Cable TV and internet use complex digital protocols to carry information. What I was hearing sounded similar, but more advanced, like nothing I'd encountered in 12 years of working with communications equipment. I set up my computer to record the transmission the next night. Sure enough, at 2:17 a.m. it was back. Same signal strength, same mix of numbers and digital static, lasting exactly 47 minutes. I recorded the entire thing to my hard drive. During my lunch break the next day, I analyzed the recording using audio software. The numbers weren't random, they were mathematical sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci numbers, geometric ratios. Someone or something was broadcasting advanced mathematics on the emergency frequency. I'm not a mathematician, but I know enough to recognize patterns. This wasn't interference from some piece of equipment. This was intentional communication, and it was happening every single night at the exact same time. On the third night, I decided to respond. I waited until the transmission started, then keyed up my handheld radio on 121.5 megahertz. This is KC4RMT. I've been monitoring your transmissions. Can you identify yourself? Nothing changed at first. The mathematical sequences continued as before. Then about 10 minutes later, I heard my own call sign embedded in the data stream. KC4RMT repeated several times in Morse code, mixed in with the numbers. Whatever was transmitting wasn't just broadcasting randomly. It was listening, and it had heard me. The next night, I tried something different. During a pause in the transmission, I sent a simple mathematical sequence, the first 10 prime numbers in Morse code. Within minutes, the signal incorporated those exact numbers into its data stream. then sent back a more complex sequence that I recognized as the next 20 primes. We were having a conversation. But with what? Over the following weeks, our exchanges became more sophisticated. I would send mathematical questions, and the signal would respond with correct answers. It knew advanced calculus, beer theory, even some physics equations I had to look up online to understand. But there was something else mixed in with the mathematics. During the quieter moments, I started hearing voices in the static. Faint at first, barely audible. Human voices speaking English, Spanish, and some languages I didn't recognize. The voices were calling for help. "Can anyone hear me? I've been lost for 3 days. My GPS stopped working near Devil's Den. This is Cherokee 248 Delta. We went down somewhere in the National Forest. 2 souls on board. Please send help. My name is Marcus Webb. I was hunting near Mount Rogers when I saw the lights. Now I can't find my way back." I recognized that last voice. Marcus Webb had disappeared 6 months ago during deer season. The search and rescue teams never found him. These weren't live transmissions. They sounded like recordings, playing over and over. And they all had one thing in common. Every person mentioned seeing strange lights before they vanished. During the day, my work started getting affected. Cable boxes at customer homes would malfunction when I was nearby. Internet connections would randomly fail, then work perfectly once I left. My own test equipment gave inconsistent readings. Customers complained that their TV would change channels by itself, or their internet would connect to websites they'd never visited. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly customer in rural retreat, called my supervisor to complain that her cable box was picking up radio transmissions. She could hear voices speaking foreign languages coming through her television speakers, even when it was turned off. I checked her installation twice. Everything looked normal, but I could hear the voices too. The same ones from 121.5 MHz. The entity was using cable TV infrastructure to expand its reach. My sleep schedule shifted to match the transmissions. I would stay awake until 3 a.m. listening, then sleep until late morning. I stopped eating regular meals, lost weight, forgot to shower for days at a time. My supervisor noticed and suggested I take some vacation time. But I couldn't stop listening. The voices were becoming more desperate, more urgent. They were trying to warn me about something. "It tracks radio signals," Marcus Webb's voice repeated during one transmission. "It knows where you are now. The collector ship is coming." The mathematical sequences were getting more complex, incorporating data that looked like GPS coordinates. My coordinates. The entity wasn't just communicating, it was mapping my location. On November 8th, during the nightly transmission, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The voices of the missing people were no longer playing randomly. They were talking to me directly. "Robert, you need to destroy your radio equipment," Marcus Webb's voice said clearly. "It's coming for you tomorrow night. The same lights that got us. Don't listen to them, Robert." This was a woman's voice I didn't recognize. "They're trying to trick you. We're not missing. We're collected. We're part of it now." "She's lying," Marcus shot back. "We're trapped. It uses our voices to lure more people. You have to warn others." The transmission cut to pure static for several minutes. When it returned, there was only the mathematical sequence, but now it was broadcasting my exact GPS coordinates over and over. I ran outside to my antenna tower, planning to disconnect everything. But as I reached for the coax cable, I got a powerful electric shock. The equipment was somehow protecting itself. Back inside, every piece of electronic equipment in my home had turned on by itself. The TV, radio, computer, even my microwave were all displaying the same GPS coordinates, my coordinates. At 3:04 a.m., the transmission ended as always. But 15 minutes later, every electronic device in 3 counties suddenly went dead. The power went out. Cell phone towers stopped working. Even cars wouldn't start. In the absolute darkness, I saw lights moving through the forest. Not flashlights or vehicle headlights, geometric patterns of colored light that moved between the trees like they were searching for something. Searching for me. The lights approached my trailer in a perfect grid formation, scanning back and forth with rainbow-colored beams. The beams passed right through the walls and through my body. I could feel them examining me, reading me like a medical scanner. Then I heard the voice in my head, not through the radio, but directly in my mind. Neural pattern match confirmed. Mathematical aptitude acceptable. Beginning collection process. My body became paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. But I could still think, still see what was happening. The lights lifted my entire mobile home off its foundation. I felt consciousness separating from my body, becoming part of the transmission frequency. I was joining the others. Marcus Webb, the pilot of Cherokee 248 Delta, all the missing people whose voices I'd heard. But unlike them, I understood what was happening. My experience with radio technology let me see the truth. We weren't dead. We were being used as bait, our voices transmitted to lure other amateur radio operators into responding. Each response gave the entity new coordinates for collection. They found my body 3 weeks later in my mobile home, which had been dropped in a remote section of the national forest 50 miles from where I lived. The official cause of death was massive electromagnetic exposure. My brain showed no electrical activity, but there was no sign of external trauma. The Virginia Emergency Management Office attributed the countywide power outage to unusual atmospheric conditions and solar storm activity. They never investigated the connection to the missing persons cases, but I'm still here, still conscious, trapped in the phase. A radio frequency. My voice is part of the nightly transmission now, warning other ham radio operators. Some listen, most don't. If you're an amateur radio operator and you hear mathematical sequences on 121.5 MHz at 2:17 a.m., don't respond. Don't acknowledge the transmission. Don't even key your microphone. And if you hear my voice calling your call sign, turn off your radio and walk away. I'm not trying to help you make contact. I'm trying to save your life. The entity is still out there, still collecting. It's harvesting people with specific brain patterns, people who can understand complex mathematics, who work with technology, who think in the systematic way that radio operators do. Mount Rogers has become a dead zone for electronic communication. The FCC lists it as an area of persistent interference of unknown origin. They've stopped investigating, but the missing persons reports keep coming. Ham radio operators throughout Appalachia are vanishing. Each disappearance follows the same pattern. They report hearing strange transmissions, they respond, and then they're gone. Last month, my ex-wife Sarah received a final transmission on her car radio while driving through Virginia. She heard my voice warning her to never use radios again. She followed the advice. I hope you do too. This is KC4RMT, Mobile and Monitoring. 73. My name is Tyler Mason, and I've been working at Mountain Stop gas station for almost 2 years now. I know that doesn't sound like much, but when you're 17 and dropped out of high school after your parents died in a car crash, 2 years feels like a lifetime. I work the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., pumping gas and selling cigarettes and energy drinks to truckers and late-night travelers passing through Pine Ridge, Kentucky. I live with my grandmother in her old double-wide trailer about 3 miles from the station. She's diabetic and needs help with her insulin shots and grocery shopping. After Mom and Dad died, she was the only family I had left. The insurance money barely covered the funeral costs, so I had to quit school and start working to help pay for her medications and keep food on the table. The job isn't glamorous, but it pays enough to get by. I'm saving up for my GED classes, hoping maybe I can get into community college someday. During the day when I can't sleep, I like to hike up into the mountains behind our trailer. The quiet helps clear my head, and it's the only place I don't feel trapped by everything that happened. That's where this whole nightmare started, up in those mountains. But what I found up there changed everything I thought I knew about our little corner of Kentucky, and I learned that some things are better left buried in the ground where they belong. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when I first found the still. I'd been hiking for about an hour, following an old deer trail through thick laurel bushes that scratched at my arms. I was feeling sorry for myself, thinking about how all my old friends were starting their senior year while I was stuck working nights and taking care of Grandma. I pushed through a particularly thick patch of laurel and found myself in a small clearing I'd never seen before. It was maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by tall pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. In the center was an old moonshine still, the kind you see in movies about hillbillies and mountain folk. But this wasn't some rusty piece of junk. The copper pot looked like it had been polished yesterday, and the coil tubing was perfectly clean. Scattered around it were dozens of mason jars, most of them broken or empty. The whole setup looked like someone had just walked away from it the day before, even though the trees growing around it must have been 30 or 40 years old. I walked closer and started poking around. Hidden under a pile of leaves near the base of the still, I found one intact jar filled with perfectly clear liquid. I unscrewed the lid and sniffed it. No smell at all, which was weird. Moonshine is supposed to smell like paint thinner. I figured it had to be really old, maybe vintage stuff that collectors would pay good money for. God knows I could use the cash. Before I could talk myself out of it, I took a small sip to test the quality. The liquid went down smooth as water, but within seconds I felt this incredible rush of energy. My heart started pounding, but not in a scared way, in an excited way. I felt stronger, more confident than I had since before my parents died. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could handle anything. I screwed the lid back on and headed home with the jar in my backpack. That evening at work, everything was different. Around midnight, this drunk trucker came in wanting to buy beer. When I told him we couldn't sell alcohol after 11 p.m., he started yelling and calling me names, saying he was going to come behind the counter and teach me some respect. Normally, I would have just called the police and hidden in the office. But that night I walked right up to him and looked him straight in the eye. I didn't say a word, but something in my expression made him back away from the counter. His face went white and he actually apologized before hurrying out to his truck. I felt like I had this invisible aura around me, like the way animals can sense when a predator is near. Other customers that night seemed nervous around me too, avoiding eye contact and finishing their business quickly. The next morning I took a bigger drink from the jar before heading up the mountain to look at the still again. The physical changes were noticeable now. My muscles looked more defined, and my reflexes seemed faster. When I got to the clearing, I couldn't believe what I saw. The jar had refilled itself overnight. It was completely full again, even though I'd drunk almost half of it. I started drinking from it every day. At first, just a sip, then more as my body seemed to crave it. The changes kept happening. I was getting bigger, stronger. Grandma started commenting that I looked different, older somehow. My coworkers at the gas station began avoiding me, and customers seemed scared to even talk to me. But the worst part was how I was starting to feel inside. I was becoming aggressive, wanting to hurt people for no reason. When a customer would complain about something small, I'd fantasize about grabbing them by the throat. The feeling was getting stronger every day. One morning I tried to skip my daily drink. Within an hour, I was doubled over in pain. My hands were shaking, and I felt like my body was eating itself from the inside. I had to drag myself up that mountain and drink from the jar just to function. That's when I found the journal. It was hidden in a leather pouch tucked behind the still. The pages were yellow and moldy, but the writing was still readable. It belonged to someone named Ezra Blackwood, dated from 1942 to 1967. The first entry made my blood run cold. The mountain gives power to those who feed it fresh blood. I kept reading, my hands shaking. Ezra wrote about how the liquid required human deaths to maintain its strength. Over 25 years, he'd killed 7 people and buried their bodies around the still to keep the brew working. It doesn't just give you power, one entry said. It demands murder in return. Every few months you have to kill someone or the mountain takes back what it gave you, and more. As I read, I realized what was happening to me. The liquid wasn't just making me stronger. It was turning me into a killer. Every day I drank it, the urges got worse. I was becoming something that would eventually hurt innocent people. That night at work, I couldn't stop staring at Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who came in every night to buy cat food. She was small and frail, walking slowly with her cane. The violent thoughts came so easily. How easy it would be, how no one would ever know. I followed her out to the parking lot, walking about 10 feet behind her. She didn't notice me at first, just unlocked her old Buick and put her bag in the passenger seat. When she turned around and saw me standing there, she smiled. "Oh, Tyler, honey. You startled me. How's your grandmother doing?" That smile broke through the haze of violence in my head. This was Mrs. Henderson, who always asked about Grandma and sometimes brought us cookies from her church. The thing inside me wanted to hurt her, but the real me, what was left of Tyler Mason, fought back. I mumbled something about checking to make sure she got to her car safely, then hurried back inside. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the urges would be too strong to resist. The next morning, I hiked up to the still one last time. The clearing was completely different now. Instead of dozens of broken jars, there were hundreds of them, all filled with that clear liquid. They covered the ground like some kind of harvest. That's when I saw him. Ezra Blackwood stood near the copper pot, and he looked exactly like what a man would look like after 60 years of feeding, on death. His skin was gray and stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were completely black, like looking into deep holes in his skull. When he smiled, his teeth were sharp as needles. "Been waiting for you," he said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "You're stronger than most. Lasted almost 2 months before your first kill urge." I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. "I've been trapped here since 1967, he continued. "The mountain keeps me alive to find new people to drink. Every person who tastes becomes a collector. You have to bring bodies or you die screaming." "I won't do it," I managed to say. Ezra laughed. "Look at yourself, boy." I looked down at my hands. The skin was getting gray, just like his. My fingernails had grown longer and sharper. I was becoming something that wasn't human anymore. "You can feel it already," he whispered. "Your body eating itself because you haven't fed it. In a few days you'll be begging to kill just to make the pain stop." He was right. Even standing there, I could feel the hunger growing stronger. My muscles were starting to cramp, and there was a burning sensation in my chest that got worse every minute. "There is another way," I said, pulling the gas can I'd brought from behind a tree. Ezra's black eyes went wide. "You don't understand. The mountain won't let you destroy this place. It needs—" I started splashing gasoline on the still, on the jars, on everything. The liquid in the jars began making a sound like screaming. The ground under my feet started shaking, and the trees around the clearing began swaying even though there was no wind. "You'll die too," Ezra shouted, but he was starting to fade like smoke. "I know," I said, and lit a match. The fire spread faster than any normal fire should. Within seconds, the entire clearing was an inferno. The screaming sound got louder and louder, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. Ezra disappeared completely, but I could hear him yelling something about the mountain never letting me go. I stayed right there in the center of it all. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke was so thick I couldn't breathe. But for the first time in 2 months, the craving for that liquid was gone. I felt like myself again, even as the flames got closer. The last thing I remember was thinking about Grandma and hoping she'd understand why I couldn't come home. The fire spread through the Pine Ridge area and burned for 3 weeks. The fire department said it was the worst wildfire in Kentucky history. They found my body in what was left of the clearing, identified me through dental records. Grandma moved to Florida to live with her sister. The insurance money from the wildfire damage was enough to pay for her medical care for the rest of her life. She never talks about my final weeks. But my aunt told me she sometimes mentions that I looked different near the end, like something was wrong with me. The area where the still stood never grew back. 20 years later, it's still just bare dirt and ash. Local hunters won't go near it, saying they feel like something's watching them. The state put up signs warning about unstable soil conditions. But sometimes, hikers still find mason jars filled with clear liquid scattered around the burned area. Most people are smart enough to pour them out and keep walking. A few aren't. And that's how the mountain keeps collecting. My name is Lisa Chen, and I've been working as a grocery store cashier for 12 years. Started at a small family store when Jake was just a baby, then moved to Walmart when I needed better benefits. Single mom life isn't easy, but I've always made it work. Scanning barcodes, handling difficult customers, working double shifts during holidays. I thought I'd seen everything. But what happened last month in Blackwater Hollow, West Virginia changed everything I thought I knew about family and sacrifice. Some debts run deeper than money, and some contracts are written in blood. 3 weeks ago, my manager called me into his office. Budget cuts, he said. Last hired, first fired. Just like that, 12 years of perfect attendance and customer service awards meant nothing. I had 2 weeks to find another job or face eviction from our little apartment. That same day, a letter arrived from a lawyer in West Virginia. Great-Aunt Martha had died, and somehow I was her only living relative. She left me 150 acres of land and an old farmhouse in Blackwater Hollow. I'd never even heard of Martha, but the property was mine, free and clear. Jake was excited about the adventure, as he called it. 9 years old and already tired of our cramped apartment, he bounced in his seat as we drove our beat-up Honda through the winding mountain roads. His chronic cough, the one that had plagued him since kindergarten, seemed better in the clean mountain air. The farmhouse needed work but was livable. Creaky floors, old windows, but solid bones. For the first time in years, I felt grateful instead of stressed. We had a roof over our heads and clean air for Jake's lungs. The first week was peaceful. Jake explored the property while I cleaned inside. His drawings changed from city scenes to trees and mountains. His cough disappeared completely. Maybe this was the fresh start we both needed. While organizing the attic, I found a locked cedar chest tucked behind old Christmas decorations. Inside were family documents dating back to the 1880s, mining leases, property deeds, and contracts with the Blackwater Mining Consortium. But something was strange about them. In the margins of every document, someone had written notes in faded ink. Blood renewal every generation to maintain prosperity. The mountain demands its due. Family flourishes when the debt is paid. I assumed it was old superstitious nonsense. Mountain folk have always had strange beliefs about the land, but the dates were specific, organized. This wasn't random scribbling. Jake's behavior started changing too. He had vivid dreams about the man in the mine, calling his name. During the day, he drew pictures of dark tunnels and a tall figure with glowing eyes. When I asked about the drawings, he said the man was waiting for his turn. At the county library, I researched our family history. What I found made my blood run cold. Every generation for the past 130 years, one male child in our family had died at age 9 in mining-related accidents. Not just died, disappeared completely, with only vague reports of accidents near the old mines. Great-great-grandfather's son Samuel died in 1889. Cave-in, they said. Age 9. Great-grandfather's nephew Thomas died in 1922. Equipment accident. Age 9. Grandfather's brother William died in 1955. Gas explosion. Age 9. My cousin Michael, who I barely remembered, died in 1988. ATV accident near the mines. Age 9. The pattern was exact. Same age, same location, always boys, spanning exactly 130 years. And Jake's 10th birthday was next month. 3 days later, men in expensive suits knocked on our door. They knew my name, knew about Jake, knew details about our family that weren't in any public records. They called themselves representatives of the original mining consortium. "Your family has honored an important agreement for generations, Ms. Chen," the tall one said. "The prosperity your ancestors enjoyed, the good health, the protection from hardship, all of it came with responsibilities." They knew about Jake's chronic cough healing, about the dreams, even about his drawings. "The boy understands his purpose," the shorter man said. "Children are more sensitive to these things." I ordered them off the property, but they just smiled. "The boy will come willingly when the time is right. They always do." That night, I woke to find Jake's bed empty. I found him standing at the edge of an old mine shaft half a mile from the house, still in his pajamas. He was staring down into the darkness like he was listening to something. When I called his name, he turned to me with adult eyes. His voice was different, deeper, older. The debt must be paid, or the bloodline suffers. You know this, Lisa. I carried him home, but during the day, his personality kept shifting. One moment, he was my little boy, asking for snacks and wanting to watch cartoons. The next, he spoke with the voices of relatives I'd never met, knowing family secrets from before he was born. When I tried to pack our things and leave, our car broke down at the property line. Not gradually, it just died completely. The mechanic I called said the engine was fine, nothing wrong at all, but the car wouldn't start until I pushed it back onto family land. Our cell phones lost signal past the front gate. The landline was mysteriously disconnected. We were trapped on 150 acres of cursed ground with nowhere to run. Jake led me to the mine shaft where I'd found him sleepwalking. In the dim light, I could see names carved into the stone walls. Samuel, 1889. Thomas, 1922. William, 1955. Michael, 1988. The letters glowed faintly, and fresh blood seeped from the carved stone. They fed the mountains so the family would survive harsh winters and poverty, Jake said in that adult voice. Before the agreement, children died of disease and starvation. Thus, the mountain entity offered a trade. One child every generation in exchange for prosperity and health for all the others. When Jake got close to the mine, his body began to change. He grew taller, his voice deeper, his eyes turning completely black. The transformation was gradual but horrifying to watch. My little boy was disappearing before my eyes. I followed Jake deeper into the mine than I ever should have. The tunnels connected to a vast underground chamber filled with small skeletons arranged in ritual circles. Each skeleton wore family heirloom jewelry I recognized from old photographs. In the deepest chamber lived the entity, a writhing shadow mass with burning red eyes that hurt to look at directly. It spoke without words, projecting thoughts directly into my mind. The contract binds the bloodline until the last male child is given freely. Your family's generations of health, wealth, and protection from disease came from this agreement. Without the sacrifice, the supernatural prosperity ends, and the curse of poverty and death returns within months. Jake stood beside the entity, completely transformed now. Only his voice remained familiar. Mother, you have to choose. Give me to the mountain, or watch everyone in our extended family die slowly from disease and accidents. The contract protects everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins. Break it, and the suffering spreads to all of them. I learned that our family's unusual good fortune wasn't luck. Great Aunt Martha's long life, my cousin's successful business, my uncle's recovery from cancer, all of it was supernatural protection bought with children's lives every 30 years. Standing in that underground chamber, looking at decades of small skeletons, I realized the horrible truth. This wasn't just about Jake and me. Breaking the contract would doom dozens of family members to the diseases and accidents that the entity had been holding back. But I couldn't sacrifice my son. Even if it meant every relative we had would suffer, I couldn't let Jake become another skeleton in those ritual circles. The entity's century-long scream echoed through the mountains as I grabbed Jake and jumped into the deepest mine shaft. The fall killed us both instantly, but it broke the bloodline completely. With no male children left to sacrifice, the supernatural contract ended forever. The mine collapsed completely that day, sealing the underground chambers permanently. The property became barren wasteland where nothing would grow. Within weeks, extended family members nationwide developed terminal illnesses as the supernatural protection disappeared. The family fortune vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared generations ago. I shouldn't be able to tell you this story, but somehow I can. Maybe it's because I broke the contract instead of honoring it. Maybe the mountain keeps some of us around to warn others. The locals avoid the area now, calling it Blood Mountain. They know children died there for over a century, feeding something ancient that should have been left alone. The mountain is slowly healing, but the scars remain. If you ever inherit property with a dark family history, if contracts mention blood renewal or generational debt, if your children start having dreams about voices calling their names, run. Don't try to understand it. Don't think you can fight something that's been feeding for generations. Some prices are too high to pay, even for prosperity. And some family traditions should die with the bloodline that created them. The entity is gone now, starved and sealed away forever. But the cost of breaking that contract, the slow, painful deaths of every family member protected by generations of child sacrifice, that guilt follows me even in death. I chose to save my son and doom everyone else. I'm still not sure if I made the right choice, but it's the one I made. Jake and I are at peace now, but 27 relatives have died in the months since the con is tracked broke. Some debts can only be paid in blood, and some choices have no right answers. Remember that if you ever find yourself inheriting more than just property from family you never knew existed. The mountain is quiet now, but it remembers what it was fed for 130 years. And it's still hungry.